Well, hi everybody. I'm not sure who's here. We don't have much of a turnout in person here, and I wonder if we're taking off New Year's Eve, and that's why our usuals aren't here. So I'm going to wait another minute or two, and I'm going to see who shows up, and if no one does, what I'll do is I'll turn this into a short devotion, because I have a lot of what I think is interesting things to introduce about Ecclesiastes, and I don't want to go over it and have the folks who usually come miss out. So we finished Proverbs last week, and this week we'll start Ecclesiastes, which is kind of the anti-Proverbs. It's the opposite of Proverbs, where Proverbs says that there's a moral order to the universe, and there's a plan to life, and there are rewards built into the world for goodness and righteousness. You get what you earn, you do good, you believe, then you receive blessings. Ecclesiastes says the opposite and says you can be good, you can be faithful, you can live a good life, and you can see sorrow and suffering, and you can never be rewarded. So, and one way to look at this is that Proverbs is the advice of a father to a young son, a teenager, and Ecclesiastes is the wisdom or advice of an old man to maybe a son who's a bit older and who's been beaten up by life, maybe taken some licks. And Ecclesiastes speaks to that. In a way, Ecclesiastes is a bit of a depressing book. Some people find it that way. I actually don't think it is. It might be a hard truth, but it tells us that there is no hope in this world. That, the reward of faith is not prosperity and an easy life. The reward of faith, if there is one, is not of this world. And we all know that, I think, at some level. Most Christians know that, but it's sort of a hard lesson. Sometimes though we know it, we really expect that we're going to have a good, easy life, and we don't always. So it looks like we've got quite a few joining us. So there's 5 here. I'm going to say hi in the comments. Let us know that you're watching. It looks like we have Jean, Liana, Patty, and a few others. So hi everybody. I'm going to keep going then. If we're gonna do Ecclesiastes. I know some of you aren't here, but there's enough watching that we're going to move forward. So the title Ecclesiastes, another title is the word Kohelet. I don't know if you ever heard that before, but Kohelet means, that's the name that the speaker gives to himself. If you open up your Bibles to Ecclesiastes, it comes right after Proverbs. Verse 1 says the words of the teacher, and that the Hebrew word is Kohelet, and it means something like teacher or observer. And you'll notice that as Kohelet speaks, he speaks in the first person in this book. He will say, I have seen, I have seen, I have seen, I have observed. So this is the wisdom of experience of a man who's lived a long life, who's seen things, who knows things, who's learned from experience. Oh, hi Kitty, hi Shirley. Oh good, we have a great group. I'm glad that you're here. Say hello in the comments like you have been. Post questions. We'll do this online. We're doing Ecclesiastes chapter 1 verse 1. Kohelet, the teacher, the observer. And again, this is an old man speaking to us who's lived, he's lived a hard life, but he's also been king. We think it's King Solomon. That's who it's supposed to be anyway. And Solomon had money, he had wealth, he had everything a man could want, but yet he sees that it's what he calls vain. The word vanity appears a lot, and vanity comes from the Hebrew word for the Hebrew word is habel, and it means vapor or breath, meaning transient, passing, not permanent. So all life is passing away. Everything in life is temporary. And for the writer, for Kohelet, because everything in the world is temporary, none of it it doesn't give a lasting reward. It doesn't provide ultimate meaning, because everything's temporary. Even our blessings come and go. Okay, let's get into the text. I should say something about date. The scholars actually think this was written late. It's attributed to Solomon, but it probably was written more towards the 4th or 3rd century BC. So that's some historical background. Let's start reading. Chapter 1, verse 1. The words of the teacher son of David, king in Jerusalem, and son of David, Solomon. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What does man gain from all his labor at which he toils under the sun? Another theme of this book is toil, or labor, that it is the fate of human beings to work, but everything we work for passes away, right? Your money passes away, your house passes away. We work hard, but all of the fruits, all the benefits of our labor simply come and go like vapor, and that's why he calls it vanity. Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, where they return again. All things are wearisome. Wearisome in the sense of repetitive. What Kohelet is saying is, look, the year goes round and around and everything's the same. Nothing changes. In other words, the world or life doesn't seem to be going anywhere. It doesn't seem to have a purpose. It's not moving towards some end point. It just, the same stuff just happens over and over and over again. Like I said, there's a depressing aspect to it, but there's an honesty and a truth. So I hope you have the stomach for it. I hope you don't get turned off by it being a little bit, maybe not as optimistic as what you'd look for, because there is an important message in this book and a wisdom. The eye, verse 8, the eye never has enough of seeing, nor the ear its fill of hearing. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. What a good message for New Year's Eve, right? We call this the New Year, but Kohelet says, what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. And again, it's telling one of the reasons this book's important for Christian is because it tells us that the hope that we're looking for is not in this world. The new year, just because it's a new year, is not going to bring hope. Hope comes from outside the world. It comes from God, not from the world. And so we shouldn't, it's fine to have a New Year's celebration, but we shouldn't pin our hopes for meaning and purpose on the changing of a calendar, because the next year is likely to be pretty much the same as the one that came before it. Verse 10, is there anything of which one can say, look, this is something new? It was here already long ago. It was here before our time. There is no remembrance of men of old, and even those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow. This again is the wisdom of someone who has experience. Those of you who've lived longer than I, you've probably watched your children or your grandchildren get all excited about something, and you've seen it before. You've been through it before. You know what it's like. It's not new to you because you're older and you've experienced it. And that's what the writer is saying here. Kohelet, our teacher, says things, you might think something's new, you might think something's never happened before, but if you live long enough, or if you knew history, you would know, yeah, it has happened before. There's nothing new. We've been through this. It's been done. Okay. And then he laments. This is kind of like the famous quote by Santana that those who don't know the past are condemned to repeat it. He says, there is no remembrance of men of old, and even those who are yet to come will not be remembered by those who follow. So there's two things there. One is we don't remember the past well enough, but two, eventually if you wait long enough, even the memory of you will be gone. And again, that it sounds depressing, but it's telling us that ultimate meaning, eternal meaning, isn't going to come from anything in this world. It has to come from outside of it. Verse 12. I, the teacher, Kohelet, was king over Israel and Jerusalem. I devoted myself to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under heaven. He's saying, look, I've been a king. I've read books. I've had experiences. I've seen and I've read. I've seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless. And the word again there for meaningless is this word hebel, which means vapor or breath, meaning temporary, passing. What is twisted cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. That's verse 15. I thought to myself, look, I have grown and increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I have experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. So he studied both wisdom and its opposite. He studied madness. But I learned that this too is a chasing after the wind. The wind, that ties into the metaphor of vanity, that it is vapor or breath. Wind comes and goes, it's not permanent. And here's verse 18, for with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. He's saying that the wiser he became, the more knowledge he had, the more his heart broke, because he saw that there was no purpose to it. All right, chapter 2. I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is foolish, and what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. So in other words, what is meaningful? What is worthwhile? And he said, well, laughing is just a distraction. Pleasure is only temporary. Wine, I tried to distract myself with wine, but it didn't work. Verse 4, I undertook great projects. So he tried to be ambitious. He tried to do things. He tried to build something. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem. So he got rich. He pursued money. Maybe that'll bring me meaning, he thought. I'll get lots of things and I'll have lots of wealth. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired men and women singers, so I tried to entertain myself. This is all the stuff that we do, right? All the ways we try to fill our lives with meaning. We try to make a living. We try to get a house, have a nice yard. We try to buy things that make us happy. We try to entertain ourselves. We go on vacations, take trips. We watch stuff on TV. We go to shows. I acquired men and women singers and a harem as well. I won't elaborate on that. Solomon did have, I don't remember, hundreds of wives and hundreds of concubines. So in other words, he chased meaning through sex as well. The delights of the heart of man. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all my labor. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. So all those ways that he sought meaning in life to bring himself a sense of contentment, they all failed. Okay, verse 12. Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. So even though, he says, even though wisdom or knowledge increases sorrow, wisdom is still better than ignorance. It's still better to be wise than foolish. The wise man has eyes in his head, while the fool walks in the darkness, but I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. And that's really where we see an argument going on between Ecclesiastes and Proverbs, where Proverbs says that a good fate will come upon the righteous and a bad fate will come upon the wicked. Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, says that, the same fate overtakes them both. And what he means there is death. They both die. The good man and the bad man, they both end up in the same place. And I also want to make one more point here about that this may seem pessimistic, but in a way it's not, because Kohelet says, even still, even still, even though life is meaningless, even though there's no purpose in the world, it's still better to be wise, and he will say later, it's better to be good. It's better to obey God, even if you don't see a benefit from it. Even though obeying God will not get you a long life or a happy life or an easy life, it's still better to obey God than not to. So Kohelet, I think, is important for several reasons, and one of them is that even when life seems meaningless, he affirms that it's still good to obey God. Verse 15, then I thought in my heart, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? In other words, and the reference again there is death. What good does it do me to read these books and to know things and to be wise? I'm going to die just like the person next door who never read a book and doesn't know anything. We're going to end up in the same cemetery. What difference does it make? I said in my heart, this too is meaningless. For the wise man, like the fool, will not be long remembered. Even wise men are eventually forgotten. In days to come, both will be forgotten. Like the fool, the wise man too must die. All right. Any questions? Go ahead and type them in the comments. Hi, Alice. Hi, Linda. Hi, Barbara. Hi, Reggie. Hi, Jim. And hi, Dorothy. All right. Verse 17. And now we're going to talk about work. So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. Why was it grievous? Not because he's lazy, but because he realizes that no matter how hard he works, everything he does will pass away. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me, and who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool. As a king, he may build a wonderful kingdom that is peaceful and prosperous and beautiful, but the person who succeeds him on the throne might be a terrible king and might destroy it all, and he'd have no control over it, nothing he could do about it. And if you study history, you know that that's the case with most every kingdom. Good kings are followed by terrible kings who undo all the good that was done before them. Yet he will have control over all the work into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a man may do his work with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then he must leave all he owns to someone who has not worked for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. What does a man get for all the toil and anxious striving with which he labors under the sun? All his days his work is pain and grief. Even at night his mind does not rest. This too is meaningless. This is the picture of someone who may be a bit of a workaholic. And it's also tragic too. In Solomon's case, Solomon left his kingdom to his sons, and under his sons his kingdom fell apart, under his sons' rule. The north split from the south, and it pretty much went downhill after Solomon died. Verse 24, a man can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work. Again, there's the where I would argue this is not as pessimistic as people think, because he says, even if you look the meaninglessness of life square in the eye, it's still better to work and enjoy your work and take what pleasure you can in the fruits of your labor. There's no ultimate meaning, but doing right and working hard is still worth it. So a man can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in his work. This too I see is from the hand of God. And Kohelet never doubts that there's a God. As pessimistic again as it may seem, there is an optimism in that he believes that it's good to do right no matter what, and he believes that we should obey God no matter what and believe in God no matter what. All this I see is from the hand of God, for without him who can eat or find enjoyment? To the man who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness, But to the sinner he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. All right, now we have some of the famous verses. We're in chapter 3 here that you probably know from the song. Chapter 3, verse 1, there's a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. I want to pause there because the main wisdom or truth of this song, and it is a song or it's a poem, is to say that no one truth is applicable in all circumstances. Many of us are searching for certainty in our lives. We want to know what's right and what's wrong. That's a good desire. But what Kohelet teaches us is that what is right in one circumstance may be wrong in another. And that's why, again, we talked about this in Proverbs, why we sometimes see contradictions in the Bible, because the Bible knows much better than we do that what is called for, what is true, what is right in one time and place isn't in another. And that's really what wisdom is. See, wisdom is not just knowing the commandments of God. It's knowing which commandments are most important in which situation. And no, that's not something you can memorize. That's not someone can hand to you, right? That's not easy. That takes experience and study and wisdom and a calm mind. But that's really the message here, is that what Kohelet tells us is wisdom is knowing what to do in what circumstance. Okay. Verse 9. What does the worker gain from his toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on men. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. Okay, pause here because it's important again. Going back to Proverbs, which we just read, Proverbs paints a picture of the world that is orderly, right? The world works according to rules. You do good, you get good, you reap what you sow. The world or life has an order to it and a reciprocity to it. And what Kohelet says is sometimes it doesn't. Maybe you've heard it put this way. Maybe I can bring this relevant to your life. You ever heard the phrase, everything happens for a reason? That's what Proverbs says. Everything happens for a reason. That's comforting to a lot of folks. It's not comforting to others. Some people don't like that. And I won't tell you which to feel. Whichever way you feel about that phrase is personal to you. And I won't tell you it's right or wrong. But what Kohelet points out, and I think this is indisputable, even if things happen for a reason, we don't know what the reason is, right? We don't see it. We don't understand it. We don't know why bad things happen to good people. We don't see that purpose. And that is a source of sadness for us. We can say everything happens for a reason, but what good is that if we don't know what the reason is, or if we can't understand it? And so often in life, this is true, that we don't understand God's plan. We don't see or understand the order that there might be to life. But we have, the irony though is that we have a desire. We want to know the meaning. We look for meaning and purpose, but we can't find it. So they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for men than to be happy and to do good while they live. This kind of goes back to Job, too, where we can see in Job. So, okay, Proverbs says, if you do good, you will get good rewards. Well, sometimes you don't get good rewards, but it is still good to do good. And that what the question the book of Job asks is, even if you knew, like Job, that you weren't going to be rewarded for being good, would you be good anyway? Would you do what is right if you knew there was no reward guaranteed to you? Or if you knew the opposite, if you knew that by doing right you would suffer, would you do the right thing and be good just because it's good? And that's an important question we all have to ask, I think, in life, every human being. And what Kohelet says is, look, you may not be rewarded for being good, but you should still be good. Verse 13. That everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil, this is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken away from it. God does it so that men will revere him. So Kohelet honors God even though he doesn't understand what God is doing. Verse 15, we've heard this before. Whatever is has already been, and what will be has been before, and God will call the past to account. And there is a faith that someday God will judge. God will punish the evil and reward the good. And I saw something else under the sun. In the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of justice, wickedness was there. And here's that insight that is so hurtful to a person of faith when they see that sometimes the good suffer and sometimes evil people prosper or succeed. And that's what he means by, in the place of judgment I saw wickedness. I thought in my heart, God will bring to judgment both the righteous and the wicked, for there will be a time for every activity, a time for every deed. There are hints of this here, although it's not clearly expressed, of the idea of an afterlife. We don't have much talk of an afterlife in Proverbs, and it's barely here in Ecclesiastes, but here you see a glimmer, a spark pointing to this idea that after death there will be judgment and justice. In this life, it may be that wicked men do great, but someday there will be a judgment. There's a time for everything, and it will come, the time will come. God will bring to judgment both the righteous and the wicked, for there will be a time for every activity, a time for every deed. I also thought, as for men, God tests them so that they may see that they are like the animals. So he sees life as sort of a test to humble us. Man's fate is like that of the animals, right? Animals die, so do we. The same fate awaits them both. As one dies, so dies the other. All have the same breath. We all breathe. We're all temporary, from the dog in the field to the king. Man has no advantage over the animal. Everything is meaningless. All go to the same place. All come from dust, and to dust all return. Who knows if the spirit of man rises upward, and if the spirit of the animals goes down to the earth? There's another hint. And it's only a hint, but it's worth seizing upon, that there could be something more beyond this world and beyond this life. And that's so important because Kohelet clearly shows us, and I think we all do need reminded of this, there's no hope in this world. There's no hope in what we can touch and see. There's no hope in our money. There's no hope in building some kind of utopia. True hope is going to have to come from beyond this world. Okay. So I saw that there is nothing better for man than to enjoy his work, because that is his lot. For who can bring him to see what will happen after him? Again, even though we can't know, even though it seems meaningless, even though it all ends, we should still do what is right, and we should still work and take what satisfaction we can from it. All right, let's do one more chapter, chapter 4. Again, I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed. See, this ties back to the earlier passage where he said, someone who increases knowledge increases sorrow. The more you learn about the world, the more heartbroken you will be, because you will realize how much suffering is in the world and how much innocent suffering there are. And Kohelet shows courage. He teaches us courage. That's another lesson we learn from this book, is many of us would choose to look away. Many of us would choose to ignore the darker realities of our world. Most of us would rather change the channel when we see the starving children. But Kohelet has the courage to look the reality of suffering and darkness in the world, look it right in the face. So again, I saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun. I saw the tears of the oppressed, and they have no comforter. In other words, that children suffer and die, and they never find relief, at least not in this life. Power was on the side of their oppressors. The bad guys have all the guns, and they have no comforter. And I declared that the dead who had already died are happier than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been. Job says the same thing, by the way. In the book of Job, Job says, not that he wishes he were dead, but that he wishes he'd never been born. But it's very dramatic, I know. But better than both is he who still has not been, who has not seen the evil that is done under the sun. Again, that courage, though, the courage to see the world as it really is, to look at the world for what it is, and not to turn away and not to distract ourselves, but to see the truth. And I saw that all labor and all achievement spring from man's envy of his neighbor. Right? Even our work has some bad motivations. We're good. You're a good man. You go to work, but part of why you're working is so that you can have more than your neighbor. And this too, he says, is meaningless, vapor, vanity, a chasing after the wind. The fool folds his hands and ruins himself. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. Again, the person might be wiser who doesn't work too hard, because after all, you can't take it with you. Again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil. Yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. So this is a man who's alone. He has no family, and he might work, but what's it for? He's got no children to leave it to, and this makes him sad. Verse 9, 2 are better than one, because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. This is a passage sometimes read at weddings, which is fitting. But it reminds us that though the world is dark in some ways and harsh, if you have family, that's something to be thankful for. And that might be a lesson for us for a new year, that some of us are probably lonely right now. I can imagine a lot of us are, with everything going on. But if you have anyone in your life that cares for you, that is a treasure. And that makes the cold easier to bear, the loneliness easier to bear, the meaningless easier to bear. If you have someone to lie down with, or you have someone to give a hug to, or even someone to call on the phone and tell them that you love them. So that is a place to find meaning in the world. Verse 13, better a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to take warning. The youth may have come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. I saw that all who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. There was no end to all the people who were before them. but those who came later were not pleased with the successor. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Again, he goes back to him reflecting on him being a king, and that those who come after him may not do what is right and may spoil all that he's built in his kingdom. All right. We'll pause here at the end of chapter 4, and I want to end, I want to give you something of a bright spot. And I want to do that by looking at 1 Corinthians, because again, I don't want you to be discouraged by Ecclesiastes and think that it's too depressing for you, because there is an important lesson. I keep saying that, but I want to be clear about what it is. Ecclesiastes uses poetry and beauty to teach us that there is no hope in this life. There is no hope in this world. And we may know that on some level, but we often forget it. We don't feel it, and we tie our hopes and our satisfaction and our meaning to things in this life. And Ecclesiastes can remind us not to. The true hope that we have comes from beyond this world. So I want to look at 1 Corinthians chapter 1. And Ecclesiastes is, as we've said before, a wisdom book. It's about wisdom. And what it does is it shows us, it takes us as far as wisdom can go. And Ecclesiastes is as far as wisdom can take us. Human wisdom. That is the destination, that wisdom, being smart, seeking knowledge. The furthest limit wisdom can take us is there, to recognize that within the world, it's meaningless. But here's what Paul says. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 22. Jews demand miraculous signs, and Greeks look for wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. Here's the key. For the foolishness of God is wiser than man's wisdom, and the weakness of God, right? Jesus crucified, Jesus defeated, Jesus dying, that's the weakness of God, is stronger than man's strength. So Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, shows us the furthest achievement of human wisdom, and it's simply this, that there is no ultimate hope in this world. But God sends a wisdom that looks foolishness to us, but in fact, it is the only hope we have, and that is that God has entered the world as a man, suffered and died for us. That is the foolishness that puts wisdom to shame. One more verse from 1 Corinthians, because Paul repeats this again. I want to point out how important it is. Here's 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 18. 1 Corinthians 3:18. Do not deceive yourselves. If any one of you thinks he is wise by the standards of this age, he should become a fool, so that he may become wise. So in other words, if you think there's some wisdom or knowledge in this world that's going to help you, you should become a fool, so that you can find true wisdom, which is in Jesus and in his death on the cross. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness in God's sight. As it is written, he catches the wise in their craftiness, and again the Lord knows that the thoughts of the wise are futile, right? Which is what Solomon or Kohelet or Ecclesiastes says. It's all futile, it's all wind. So then, no more boasting about men. All things are yours. Whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas, it's Peter, or the world, or life, or death, or the present, or the future, all are yours, and you are of Christ, and Christ is of God. So, Ecclesiastes brings us to this point where we can hear what Paul says, that there really is no wisdom in this world that's going to save us. The only salvation comes to us from beyond the world, in the person of Jesus Christ, who does what seems foolish, who comes and dies on a cross, is crucified, rejected, humiliated, tortured, and dies the death of a traitor. But in him and in his death, we have the deepest truth in all the world, and the wisdom that actually does bring us hope, because it brings us eternal life. it answers that problem of death that Kohelet points out so well. Because we all die, nothing we really can achieve on our own or in this life is going to be of use. What is eternal is of use, and that's what Jesus achieves for us on the cross. So there's the true wisdom. We may finish Ecclesiastes next week. We will meet here next week. Some of you may want to come in person. We've got enough space here where a few of us can meet in this room and be at least 6 feet away, or you can join online. But there's nothing new under the sun, but Happy New Year anyway. I hope that you have a nice night. And if you do have someone, if you have someone you care about, even if it's just a friend, give them a call and tell them you love them. Because when we're lonely and when we're particularly aware of the suffering that's in the world, simply having someone to share it with can provide a lot of comfort. So I wish that blessing on you, and Happy New Year, and I will see you. Some of you I'll see tonight, some of you I'll see Sunday, and some of you I'll see next week. God bless. Thank you.